What happens when a black woman sits in the most powerful seat on a plane only to be treated like she doesn't belong there? This isn't just about a sandwich. It's about the systems that decide who gets respect and who gets ignored. Her name is Lena Carter, at 38. She's not just successful, she's unstoppable. The founder and CEO of Carter Equity Group. Lena built a financial tech empire from scratch, guiding frontier markets and emerging economies into billions in digital investment. Forbes called her the future of global capital. The Financial Times, Wall Street's most unpredictable player. She's graced the covers of business magazines, keynoted world summits, and out-negotiated Fortune 100 executives before breakfast. But on a flight from San Francisco to Abu Dhabi, aboard the prestigious Altura Airways, all that was erased in a single moment of indifference. Lena had boarded Flight 801 not for luxury, but for legacy. She was heading to finalize a historic joint venture with a Middle Eastern sovereign fund, a deal that could shift the global flow of digital capital for decades to come. And like she always did before big decisions, she booked seat 1A, the front row, the symbol, the throne she had earned as a Platinum Circle member. She had pre-selected her meal saffron-seared scallops, truffle risotto, paired with vintage Bordeaux. It wasn't about indulgence, it was ritual. A quiet affirmation that she belonged here just as much, if not more, than anyone else. But when the flight attendant approached, Lena didn't get her meal. She didn't get her wine. She didn't even get called by name. Instead, she got a cold sandwich and a glass of water. No explanation, no apology. Around her, 6 white men were being served with caviar, laughter, and familiarity. Their names remembered, their preferences anticipated. And Lena, she was invisible. Again. But what the airline crew didn't know was this: Lena Carter didn't get to seat 1A by letting moments like that slide. She didn't react loudly. She didn't make a scene. She made systems shake. This isn't a story about food. This is a story about power, prejudice, and what happens when the wrong person is underestimated. And it all began in seat 1A. The hum of first class on Altura Airways Flight 801 was less like the buzz of excitement and more like the low purr of privilege. Soft jazz trickled through overhead speakers. Leather armrests gleamed under ambient lighting. Everything from the hand-stitched menus to the vintage wine list was engineered to affirm status. Lena Carter sat in seat 1A, the most coveted seat on the flight. Window view. First served, a seat designed for presence. But today, presence didn't seem to matter. As Lena settled in, dressed in a fitted ivory blazer and slate-gray slacks, she exuded the quiet confidence of a woman who didn't need to raise her voice to own a room. Her signature cobalt blue Cartier pen clipped neatly to her tablet, where she was reviewing final details for a $2.6 billion joint venture she was about to close in Abu Dhabi. She wasn't nervous. She was focused. The flight attendant walked by a blonde woman in her late 30s. Name tag glinting in the light, Alyssa Trent. Lena offered a polite nod. Alyssa's response was automatic, a quick smile. Then a glance past her, directly toward the white man taking seat 1B, Mr. Langford. "So good to see you again." Alyssa beamed. "Welcome back. Your usual champagne before takeoff." Lena noticed. The tone, the warmth, the recognition. No such greeting had been offered to her. Alyssa didn't ask if Lena wanted anything. She didn't even say her name. Lena wasn't surprised. She was used to navigating boardrooms where she was addressed as ma'am while her male colleagues got called by name. Still, this wasn't a boardroom. This was first class. And she wasn't here to prove herself. She was here because she'd already done that. Another attendant, Bryce, moved down the aisle, offering wine and towels. He stopped at rows 1C and 1D. 2 tech bros in matching Patagonia vests who were loudly discussing tokenized assets and laughing about someone they'd fired via Slack. "Gentlemen," Bryce said, pouring Dom Perignon into crystal flutes, "welcome aboard. Your appetizers will be ready shortly." Lena's seat remained untouched. No offer, no towel, no champagne. Her brow barely moved, but her mind began to tally. This wasn't just poor service. This was pattern. Her meal confirmed in advance as part of her Platinum Circle profile was something she never left to chance. She had requested her preferred dinner a full week prior. Her assistant had even received a confirmation text from Altura's VIP liaison. Now, as the appetizer service began, she could already hear cutlery clinking, the faint scent of saffron and seared scallops filling the air, but her tray table still empty. Then came the moment that would mark the shift. Alyssa returned, holding a tray uncovered. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said flatly. "We've run out of the premium entrees. All we have left is a cold turkey sandwich and mineral water." Her voice was clinical. No apology, no effort to soften the message. Lena blinked once. Slowly, "I pre-ordered," she replied. Her voice even. "Saffron scallops and truffle risotto. 7 days ago. Sometimes the system doesn't update." Alyssa said with a shrug, "It happens." And with that, she walked away. No attempt to verify, no effort to recover. Just a quiet dismissal as if Lena wasn't used to eating anything better than airline turkey. Around her, laughter resumed in the rows behind. The man in 1B had already been served a glass of Bordeaux. The others were placing dessert orders. Lena sat back. She didn't touch the tray. She didn't need to, because what happened in that moment wasn't about food. It was about visibility, and how, in spaces where wealth is assumed to come in one color and one gender, presence alone isn't enough. You have to claim it. But sometimes, you also have to let silence do the speaking. She thought back to her first investor meeting at 29, when a junior analyst asked her if she was the assistant to the founder. She had smiled, handed him a graph, and then closed a Series A round 3 times larger than what they'd projected. Now, nearly a decade later, nothing had changed except her patience. She tapped once on the armrest, then again, 3 times. It wasn't nervous energy, it was strategy, because Lena Carter knew something they didn't. She wasn't the kind of woman you could silently sideline. She didn't throw tantrums, she wrote checks, she rewired systems, and what had just happened in Seat 1A wasn't a service failure. It was a signal, and signals have consequences. The tray sat in front of Lena Carter like a statement unspoken but crystal clear. 2 slices of dry bread, a paper-thin layer of turkey, no garnish, a plastic cup of still water, no silverware, no cloth napkin, no grace. This wasn't just about a meal. It was a message. Lena didn't touch the sandwich, not because of pride, but because she needed to feel it, to absorb the weight of that moment, the way it stripped her, not of power, but of recognition, the way it reminded her that even when you rise high enough to fly above the clouds, the systems built below still find ways to pull you back down. Around her, the performance of luxury continued undisturbed. The man in 1B had just received his second glass of Chateau Petrus, while the conversation across the aisle had turned to yacht clubs in Monaco. The flight crew moved seamlessly, pouring, serving, smiling. Not one of them looked at her tray. Not one of them asked if she needed anything. Lena Carter, CEO of Carter Equity, with $17 billion in assets under management, wasn't seen, not truly, not in the way they saw the men in rows 1B through 2D called by name, served with tailored deference. She glanced out the window at the darkening sky, and for a moment, her own reflection stared back at her, poised, still, deliberate. But behind that calm was something rising, not rage, not humiliation, but resolve. This had happened too many times. The boardroom introductions where they assumed she was someone's assistant, the gala dinners where they skipped her for the white men she outperformed on every metric. The private bank managers who asked if she was familiar with investment tools while handling her 8-figure portfolio. She had survived it all. No, she had conquered it. But that didn't mean it didn't cost her. The cost was invisible labor, the constant calculation, the soft diplomacy, the decision to choose strategy over confrontation, time after time. And now, here it was again. Different country, different plane, same playbook. But today, something had shifted. Lena pulled out her phone not for social media, not to vent, but to act, quietly, surgically. She opened the internal operations app of Carter Equity Group, custom-built for executive-level actions. Few even knew it existed. Fewer had access. With 3 taps, she entered the discrete incident response module, usually reserved for high-stakes breaches or hostile business events. She selected incident type discriminatory service behavior location flight 801, Altura Airways. Employee identified Alyssa Trent, first-class crew lead within seconds. The system synced with Altura's passenger registry, cross-referenced against third-party APIs and internal CRM integrations. Carter Equity had, through strategic airline partnerships, a profile popped up: Alyssa Trent, tenure 6 years, rank senior cabin lead, noted for high ratings from VIP white male clientele. Previous flags: 2, soft complaints, both from women of color. Outcome: insufficient evidence to proceed. Lena's lips tightened, not in anger, in clarity. She knew that phrase, insufficient evidence. Translation: we heard you, but we don't care enough. She forwarded the full file, tagged and encrypted, to her chief compliance officer back in New York. Then, she composed a second message. This one went directly to her personal assistant and legal team. Flag behavior. Begin audit inquiry for Altura partnership review. Use code 1A, LC. That was all. Short, precise, irreversible. She didn't need a scene. She didn't need to call Alyssa out mid-flight, because the real power wasn't in demanding her scallops and champagne back. It was in making sure this never happened again. It was in creating a ripple effect, one that would start here, in silence, and echo across every luxury service boardroom that thought politeness could hide prejudice. She looked down at the tray again. Cold bread, plastic cup, paper napkin, and suddenly, it was no longer just a bad meal. It was evidence of a system where race and gender still determined whether you were seen as premium, of how luxury didn't just exclude loudly, it excluded quietly, casually, repeatedly. She thought of young women watching her, women like she once was brilliant, underfunded, overlooked. How many of them would take a moment like this and shrink? Not her, not anymore. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, and the tray jostled slightly, the sandwich sliding across the cheap plastic. Lena didn't flinch. She closed her phone, adjusted her posture, and looked ahead, calm, composed, unbothered. But inside, a storm was forming, not a loud one. Not one made of shouting or confrontation, but the kind that moves through systems, not rooms, the kind that rewrites policies, the kind that begins with a single, undeniable truth. This wasn't a mistake. It was a mirror, and Lena Carter had just turned it around so that the system had no choice but to see itself. Lena Carter didn't press the call button. She didn't ask to see a manager. She didn't confront Alyssa, the flight attendant who had casually dismissed her order like it was an afterthought, because Lena knew the truth. Systems don't change when you raise your voice. They change when you push the right button behind the curtain. As the plane cruised at 38,000 feet over the Atlantic, Lena sat still in seat 1A, her posture composed, her breath steady, but her mind had already accelerated into executive mode. She wasn't going to file a complaint. She was going to launch a protocol designed not for revenge, but for accountability. She opened the Carter Equity Internal Governance Console, a secured suite built into her executive dashboard. Originally created to monitor ethical compliance in mergers and partnerships under normal circumstances, it was used for handling risk supply chain disruptions, conflict zone alerts, equity market manipulation, but today, it was being used for something even more systemic: bias in elite service infrastructure. She typed a direct command, activate Tier 2 Audit Service Partner Code, Altura Air 01, trigger client class disparity, incident code 1A. This wasn't just a log entry. This command would silently activate a full review of Altura Airways' treatment of VIP clients across every interaction point, pre-boarding, name recognition, service differentiation by demographic segment, complaint handling time, and internal behavior patterns logged by machine learning tools. Within seconds, the system responded. Protocol acknowledged. Preliminary data collection initiated. Estimated initial report 2 hours. From her seat, Lena didn't blink. She sent a second encrypted message to her chief technology officer in London. Request access from our Skytrack Alliance partner to onboard service cam data. Priority seat 1A2D. Timestamp wheels up plus 30 mines. LC Skytrack was a partner platform Carter Equity co-developed, allowing cross-collaboration between luxury service providers for enhanced client analytics. Altura was a partner, which meant Lena had access to the data, including the cabin's camera feeds, staff movement logs, and biometric response times. By the time the other passengers were finishing their dessert, Lena's team had begun pulling interaction heat maps showing which passengers were engaged most often by staff, who received name-based service, and how long it took to respond to each call button. Her assistant texted back, initial mapping confirms 6:1 staff-to-client ratio for white male passengers versus others. No recorded greeting for Lena Carter in audio logs. Alyssa Trent, verbal tone index, 42% warmth deviation. Cold data, but irrefutable. Lena nodded slightly. Not with satisfaction, but with focus. This wasn't about her. Not anymore. It was about pattern, precedent, and proof. She drafted a short note to her legal team pending final report. Prepare clause reevaluation for Altura service exclusivity contract, review compliance penalties, possible cause for contract renegotiation under Equity Protocol Clause 2022 update. That clause had been written by Lena herself after she had experienced similar dismissiveness at a high-end hotel in Singapore. It allowed her company to penalize or terminate vendor relationships that violated internal equity standards. Altura didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just a bad moment anymore. It was a breach of values, and Lena Carter didn't do business with institutions that saw people like her as exceptions instead of entitled participants. She set her tablet aside, pulled out a leather-bound journal, and made 3 short notes in cobalt blue ink. 1. Service wasn't broken. It was programmed this way. 2. Change doesn't start with outrage. It starts with records. 3. The next woman in seat 1A shouldn't need credentials to be treated like she belongs. As the cabin lights dimmed to a soft lavender hue for rest, Lena remained wide awake. She wasn't restless. She was ready across the ocean. In Carter Equity's Midtown Manhattan HQ, her assistant, Jordan, received the audit trigger. He'd seen it used before, once during a failed partnership deal in Zurich, and another during a whistleblower case in Qatar. He didn't need instructions. Just the code 1A was enough. He routed all Altura employee service records from the past 18 months through the firm's behavioral intelligence filter. What surfaced was damning. 14 separate soft bias complaints involving Alyssa Trent, 12 of which were dismissed as service misalignment, a pattern of delayed service to non-white passengers in first and business class, 2 confidential internal notes from junior crew members, one of which read, "She always says names don't matter, just serve the ones who tip." Jordan forwarded the findings with the subject line, "Systemic pattern confirmed. Recommend escalation." Lena's phone vibrated once. She read it. Her expression didn't change, because this was the plan all along. Not to demand an apology, not to post a viral tweet, but to build a case so airtight the system couldn't ignore it. She opened her email one last time before sleep and typed a final message to Altura's executive liaison per our client agreement. Please prepare to receive a formal inquiry under the Equity Compliance Framework for First-Class Operations. Preliminary findings suggest disparity in service levels based on non-performance criteria. Our legal and PR teams will await your internal response within 72 hours. Regards. Lena Carter, Chairwoman and CEO, Carter Equity Group. She hit send. Then she closed her tablet. The plane hummed softly beneath her as it cut through the sky. Around her, no one suspected that the woman with the cold sandwich in seat 1A had just set in motion an irreversible reckoning. Not loud, not dramatic, just strategic. Just enough to shake a system that thought silence meant surrender. And Lena Carter. She didn't fly to be served. She flew to change the altitude of expectation for every woman who came after her. The descent began gently. Outside, the first golden hues of dawn spilled over the horizon as Flight 801 began its approach to Abu Dhabi International Airport. Inside the cabin, passengers stirred, adjusting seats, stretching arms, preparing for what they thought would be a routine landing. But for Altura Airways, this landing would be anything but routine. In seat 1A, Lena Carter remained composed. She closed her tablet with a soft click, her mind still sharp from the night's quiet but powerful digital maneuvers. Her watch vibrated twice, a discreet signal from her office in Manhattan. The message was simple: full behavioral report sent, legal review in progress, Altura liaison informed, command-level inquiry initiated. It had begun, and there was no undoing it now. As the plane touched down with a soft screech and glided along the runway, the cabin crew resumed their practiced smiles, thanking passengers, preparing the exit path. But in the first-class galley, flight attendant Alyssa Trent was tense. She had noticed Lena's stillness, the quiet way she never complained, the lack of confrontation. It unnerved her. Most difficult passengers voiced their dissatisfaction, loudly, emotionally. But Lena hadn't raised her voice once, and somehow that made it worse. As passengers rose to collect their bags, Lena remained seated, unhurried, intentional. She adjusted her blazer, brushed a non-existent wrinkle from her slacks, and stood with the composure of someone who was not waiting for justice, because she had already initiated it. At the aircraft door, two individuals in dark suits stood waiting. One was Farid Al-Kazemi, the regional head of service partnerships for Altura Airways Middle East. The other, a woman in a slate-gray blazer with a gold badge clipped to her pocket, Internal Ethics Division, Abu Dhabi HQ. As Lena approached, they didn't offer handshakes. They bowed slightly. "Ms. Carter," Farid said quietly, his voice taut with professionalism. "We understand there was an issue on board." Lena didn't stop walking. She offered only one sentence measured. Clear. "You'll find the issue in your inbox, and you'll find your solution in your policy reforms." Then she stepped past them, flanked by her personal security and awaiting transport. No raised voice, no demands, just truth. Walking out the door in heels, behind her, Farid opened his phone. The subject line on the email from Carter Equity's legal team read, "Formal Inquiry, Discrimination and Service Disparity, Flight 801, Incident Code 1A." Attached were behavioral analytics from Lena's in-flight interactions, service mapping visuals comparing treatment by passenger demographic, voice log comparisons of how Alyssa greeted different passengers, and finally, a summary video captured via Altura's own cabin cameras highlighting Lena's order denial, the tone of the interaction, and the preferential service toward others. It was undeniable, and worse, it had been happening on their watch. In the crew exit corridor at the rear of the plane, Alyssa Trent and the other first-class attendants were chatting, preparing to head to their hotel. Then they saw them. Three individuals in black Altura uniforms with red stripes on the sleeves, ethics and conduct enforcement, clipboard in hand, stern faces, crew of Flight 801. One announced, Please proceed to internal interview room 4. This is in accordance with Article 6.2 of Altura's Global Conduct Policy. The hallway went silent. Alyssa blinked. Is this about the food issue? It wasn't even confirmed in our system. The ethics officer didn't respond. He simply pointed to the corridor, one by one. They followed, still in uniform, still trying to process what had just unfolded. No shouting, no media, no scandal, just the cold inevitability of accountability. Back at Altura's regional headquarters, an emergency meeting was already underway. Fareed sat at the head of the long glass conference table, flanked by the heads of legal, PR, and global HR on the screen. Jordan Thomas, Lena's assistant, was joining via secure call from New York. He wasted no time. Carter Equity has initiated a Tier 2 equity clause review under contract subsection 4.6. Discriminatory or biased service patterns against senior executives constitute breach of ethical partnership. The room shifted uncomfortably. Fareed rubbed his temples. Do they want a formal apology? A refund? Jordan's response was cool. No. They want policy. They want institutional reform. And they want it fast. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't a publicity stunt. This was a quiet war against institutional complacency. And Lena Carter had already won the first battle with a tray of cold food, a plastic cup, and a network of data no one saw coming. By the time she arrived at her hotel, a new message appeared on her phone. Altura Ethics Board confirms internal investigation underway. Crew suspended pending review. CEO has been informed. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Because power doesn't always look like disruption. Sometimes, it looks like discipline. The news broke before Lena Carter even finished her second espresso. It started as a whisper on an industry forum, then a headline on a financial ethics newsletter. By lunchtime in New York, it was the top trending story on LinkedIn, Bloomberg, and Twitter. Black CEO denied first-class service. Quietly launches audit that suspends entire flight crew. What happened in Seat 1A was no longer confined to the soft leather walls of a luxury cabin. It had become a ripple spreading through corporate hallways, airline boardrooms, and government channels like a silent shockwave. And it wasn't just because it was Lena Carter. It was because she didn't fight back with outrage. She fought back with evidence, with strategy, with precision. By the next morning, over 9,000 emails had flooded the inboxes of Altura Airways customer relations and compliance teams. Thousands of them were from passengers who had similar experiences ignored, dismissed, or subtly downgraded in luxury spaces because they didn't look the part. A new hashtag appeared and spread like wildfire. Seat 1A within 48 hours. The hashtag had been used over 2 million times. Underneath it were stories: a black professor who was asked 3 times to prove her business class ticket, an Indian tech executive whose drink order was forgotten on 3 consecutive flights, a Latina entrepreneur who said a first-class attendant once asked her if she was traveling with someone. These weren't loud events. They were quiet violations, small slights that add up until someone like Lena turns them into policy-level consequences. Major outlets picked it up. The Guardian, 1 cold sandwich, 1 quiet response, 1 industry in crisis. Forbes, Lena Carter, from ignored to irreversible. The New York Times power doesn't have to shout. Altura Airways scrambled to release a statement. We are conducting an internal review and reaffirm our commitment to equitable service for all passengers, regardless of background. But it was too late to control the narrative, because this time, the silence spoke louder than any press release. Back in Manhattan, the Carter Equity PR team didn't say a word to the media. They didn't need to. The audit report, now circulating quietly among Lena's peers, other CEOs, investment fund managers, and corporate clients spoke volumes. It showed timelines, disparities in greeting times by race and gender, speech analysis reports of tone variation, A heat map showing the distance flight crew maintained from different passengers depending on surname and seat. The report didn't accuse, it simply showed, and that made it undeniable. 2 days later, Altura's 3 biggest institutional partners, a Swiss investment bank, a Gulf wealth fund, and a global consulting firm requested emergency equity audits of their own client travel policies. One of them, according to internal leaks, had quietly paused new ticket block purchases with Altura pending service conduct assurances. This wasn't just a PR problem, it was a strategic risk event at the UISE, Department of Transportation. A formal letter was drafted requesting Altura's full compliance and incident transparency under the Airline Passenger Equity Standards Act. It was the first such letter sent in 7 years. Meanwhile, Lena Carter. She didn't take interviews. She didn't write a think piece. She was already back at work reviewing a proposal for an African digital lending expansion and preparing a keynote for a financial inclusion summit in Nairobi. Her only public acknowledgement came in the form of a quiet post, "Let the system speak for itself. All I did was listen and respond when the time was right." Lena Carter. That single line was shared over 500 times, and beneath it, comments poured in. "I've sat in seat 34F all my life. Now I know why I never felt seen. This story made me realize my silence was being counted as acceptance." She didn't yell. She didn't rage. She just made the system flinch. In Abu Dhabi, Altura's executive board met for the 3rd time in 72 hours. Legal advisors, ethics consultants, and brand strategists filled the room. What they faced wasn't a scandal, they'd had those before. This was a paradigm shift, because Lena Carter had just proven that equity in luxury isn't a sentiment. It's a standard, and those who don't meet it, they no longer get the privilege of silence. From that day on, flight attendants were retrained, service protocols were rewritten, and in the newest version of Altura's internal crew training guide, one line stood alone on the first page: "Never assume who belongs in seat 1A. The world didn't change in a single day, but something shifted. The kind of shift you don't hear with trumpets or breaking news alerts, but one you feel in boardrooms, in crew lounges, in the way certain companies suddenly start asking themselves questions they've ignored for years. And at the center of it all sat one woman. Not in front of cameras, not on talk shows, but in seat 1A. Quietly proving that change doesn't need a microphone, just conviction. Lena Carter never sought the spotlight. After her flight landed in Abu Dhabi and the internal firestorm began within Altura Airways, Lena didn't give a single interview. She didn't tweet a hashtag. She didn't demand retribution or speak to journalists camped outside her hotel. She let the system speak for itself. The only public message she released was a single line posted from her official company account: "Power isn't in presence, it's in proof." And the next woman in seat 1A deserves both. That sentence went viral. But Lena, she had already moved on, 3 days after the incident. She delivered a keynote address at the Global Finance Inclusion Summit. She didn't mention the flight. She didn't talk about what happened. Instead, she spoke about access, about what it means to remove invisible gates in places that claim to be open to everyone but quietly exclude those who don't fit a mold. She ended her talk with a personal story about being 19, denied a credit internship because she didn't project the right image, and about how she didn't get angry. She just decided to build her own company where image would never override merit. That story wasn't in the news. But the 3,000 young women in that conference room would remember it for years. And while Lena continued to build billion-dollar portfolios, Altura Airways was still rebuilding trust. At their international headquarters, every wall bore framed commitments to luxury, to service, to excellence, without exception. But now, a new commitment was added, this one not written by a PR firm, but drafted directly in partnership with Carter Equity's ethics team. Service equity is not optional. It is our measure of integrity. Altura introduced mandatory unconscious bias training for all global staff. They created a real-time service equity dashboard to track in-flight service interactions by gender, race, and language. They also issued a private but formal apology to Lena Carter, not for PR, but because internally, they had reviewed 48 prior complaints with similar patterns. She wasn't the first. She was just the first who didn't let it pass. Back in New York, Lena returned to her office on the 47th floor of the Carter Equity Tower overlooking Midtown. The staff greeted her like any other Monday morning. No confetti, no speeches, just the quiet respect of a team that understood their CEO had just redefined what it meant to lead with dignity over drama. In her office, sunlight pooled across her desk. A single envelope waited. Delivered by hand that morning. It was from a 16-year-old girl in Houston named Jada, who had read about Lena in Forbes and followed the Russian Seat 1A stories online. Her school counselor told her to be realistic when she said she wanted to become a hedge fund manager. Jada had written, "I know people like me don't usually get seen in rooms like that, but when I saw how you handled what they did to you, I realized maybe I don't need to ask permission. Maybe I just need to show up and not leave." Lena read it twice. Then, for the first time in days, she smiled. She sat at her desk, pulled out her Mont Blanc pen, and began to write by hand something she rarely did in the digital age. Dear Jada, they will try to measure you by the wrong standards. They'll make you believe presence is earned through approval instead of earned through resilience. But never let their doubt shape your direction. You don't have to fight loud. You just have to move smart. And when you walk into rooms that weren't built for you, don't wait for permission to sit down. Bring your own seat, preferably 1A, with purpose. Lena Carter. That letter never went viral. It was never posted online, but it changed one life, and maybe that's all Lena ever really cared about. Weeks later, at a private leadership conference in Geneva, Altura Airways introduced a quiet tribute. No plaque, no statue. Just a small silver plate placed in front of seat 1A on every new aircraft they commissioned. The engraving read, "Reserved for the quiet revolution. We remember." Flight crews noticed it. Some rolled their eyes, others nodded solemnly. But for those who knew it wasn't a decoration, it was a reminder that the system had once been forced to see what it refused to acknowledge. Not by scandal, not by pressure, but by a woman who never raised her voice because her silence held more weight than their excuses. And so the story of Lena Carter didn't end with punishment. It ended with precedent. Now, every black woman boarding a luxury flight, every young leader stepping into an executive suite, every person who had once been treated like an outlier in a space they earned, they would carry her example with them. They wouldn't need to shout. They would just act at the right time, with the right tools, and the unshakable knowledge that dignity is not given, it's claimed. And next time someone in power forgets who they're serving, they'll remember. It was never about the meal. It was always about the message. And that message started in seat 1A,